The morning sun painted golden streaks across Harper's Creek's rolling hills, casting a warm glow on the wooden church that stood proudly at the heart of the small town. Father John Matthews adjusted his collar as he prepared for another day of service, his weathered hands smoothing the wrinkles from his modest clerical attire. Through the window of his small office, he could see his wife Mary tending to the garden while their adopted daughter Emily chased butterflies among the flowers. The scene brought a smile to his face, though it quickly faded as he noticed Emily stumbling slightly before catching herself. These moments of weakness had become more frequent lately, and despite their efforts to hide their concern, both John and Mary knew something wasn't right. Emily, once the most energetic child in Sunday school, now needed frequent breaks during her favorite activities. That evening, as Emily slept soundly in her room, John and Mary sat at their kitchen table, the weight of worry evident in their expressions. "John," Mary whispered, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding ring, "we need to take her to Dr. Thompson in the city. These episodes are getting worse, and the local clinic can't figure out what's wrong." John reached across the table to hold his wife's hand, feeling the trembling he knew she tried so hard to conceal. "You're right," he agreed, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil. "We'll take her tomorrow. I'll ask Sister Margaret to handle the afternoon service." The next day brought news that would shake their world to its core. Dr. Thompson's office was a stark contrast to their cozy home, all chrome and sterile white walls. The doctor's expression was grave as he delivered the diagnosis: Emily had a rare autoimmune condition that required immediate intervention. The treatment protocol he outlined was extensive, sophisticated, and devastatingly expensive. In the car ride home, Emily dozed in the back seat, unaware of the storm brewing in her parents' hearts. John gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Mary sat beside him, reviewing the medical documents with trembling hands, her background as a former nurse allowing her to understand the full gravity of their situation. That night, after tucking Emily in with an extra-tight hug, John retreated to the church sanctuary. The moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows on the worn wooden pews. He knelt at the altar, not as a priest, but as a father desperate for guidance. The church had always been his anchor, the place where he found clarity in times of confusion. Now, as he looked up at the cross, he faced the most challenging test of his faith yet. Mary found him there hours later, still deep in prayer. She joined him silently, their shoulders touching in shared strength. "We'll find a way," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "We always have." John nodded, though his mind was already racing through possibilities. The church's maintenance fund had some savings, but he had always been adamant about keeping church finances separate from personal needs. The thought of using the congregation's donations for Emily's treatment filled him with guilt, yet the alternative, watching their daughter suffer, was unthinkable. As they walked home under the starlit sky, John made a decision. Tomorrow, he would visit the local bank to discuss their options. The church property, though modest, might be enough collateral for a loan. It was a risk that could jeopardize not just his position but the spiritual home of many in Harper's Creek. Yet, as he looked at their small house where Emily slept peacefully, he knew some risks were worth taking. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching John's mood as he straightened his tie and gathered the church's documentation. Mary had spent the night researching alternative treatments, her medical knowledge driving her to seek any possible solution. Emily, despite her growing fatigue, insisted on helping with breakfast, her small hands carefully arranging toast and fruit on plates. "Daddy, why are you wearing your special tie?" Emily asked, her observant nature catching the detail that betrayed the significance of the day. John forced a smile, smoothing her hair with gentle hands. "Just have some important meetings today, sweetheart. You focus on resting and helping Mommy with her garden." The local bank of Harper's Creek stood as an imposing brick building at the town center, its architecture a stark contrast to the humble wooden structures surrounding it. John climbed the steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the marble floors echoed his footsteps as he approached the receptionist's desk. Mr. Carter, the bank manager, kept John waiting for nearly an hour before deigning to see him. The manager's office was ostentatious, with leather-bound books lining shelves that John suspected had never been opened. "Father Matthews," Carter drawled, not bothering to rise from his chair, "what brings you to our establishment today?" John explained his situation, laying out the church's financial documents and property deeds. With each word, Carter's expression grew more condescending. When John finished, the banker leaned back in his chair and laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the room's heavy air. "Let me understand this correctly," Carter said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "You want to use that ramshackle church as collateral for a medical loan? That building's barely worth the land it's sitting on. Besides," he added with a smirk, "how do we know this isn't just some scheme to line your own pockets?" The implication stung worse than any physical blow. John's hands trembled as he gathered his documents, his dignity preventing him from begging. As he turned to leave, Carter's voice followed him. "Prayer won't save your daughter, Father Matthews. Perhaps it's time to accept that." Devastated but determined not to show it, John left the bank. The summer heat felt oppressive as he walked toward his bicycle, his collar tight around his throat. Lost in his thoughts, he almost missed the sound of a car engine sputtering nearby. An expensive vehicle had pulled to the side of the road, its hood up and steam rising from the engine. The elderly gentleman standing beside it looked completely out of place in his tailored suit, frustration evident in his attempts to wave down passing cars. Without hesitation, John approached, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. "Can I help, sir?" he offered, already rolling up his sleeves. The man, who introduced himself as Henry, watched in amazement as John diagnosed and fixed the overheated engine using just the basic tools from his bicycle repair kit. "You have quite the skill set for a priest," Henry remarked, his keen eyes taking in John's worn but dignified appearance. Perhaps it was the kindness in Henry's voice, or maybe it was simply the weight of the day's events, but John found himself sharing his story. He spoke of Emily, of the community he served, and of the crushing weight of responsibility he carried. Henry listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp business mind behind his grandfatherly demeanor. As John prepared to leave, Henry pressed a business card into his hand. "Come back to the bank tomorrow morning," he said firmly. "Things might look different then." John tucked the card away, not daring to hope but touched by the stranger's concern. That evening, as he watched Emily helping Mary water their small vegetable garden, John reflected on the day's events. The sight of his daughter's determined smile as she lifted the too-heavy watering can, refusing help despite her weakness, filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever it took, he would find a way to help her, not just for her sake, but for every member of their tight-knit family. The following morning brought an unexpected shift in the atmosphere at Harper's Creek Bank. As John entered the building, he noticed the receptionist's unusually attentive behavior and the way other employees seemed to avoid his gaze. Before he could fully process the change, Mr. Carter himself hurried across the lobby to greet him, his previous arrogance replaced by an almost obsequious manner. "Father Matthews, what a pleasure to see you again," Carter said, his voice strained with forced politeness. "If you'll follow me, someone would like to speak with you." John was led to the bank's largest office, where he found himself face to face with Henry, the man he'd helped the day before. Only now, seated behind the regional director's desk, Henry's grandfatherly demeanor was accompanied by an unmistakable air of authority. "Ah, John," Henry smiled, rising to shake his hand. "Or should I say, Father Matthews? Please, have a seat." He gestured to Mr. Carter, who lingered uncertainly by the door. "That will be all, Carter. And do close the door on your way out." Once they were alone, Henry's expression grew serious. "I've reviewed the situation with your church's property, John. While Mr. Carter's assessment was, let's say, lacking in vision, I see tremendous potential in what you've built there. The community impact alone makes it a worthy investment." John listened in amazement as Henry outlined a proposal that would not only cover Emily's immediate medical needs, but also establish a community health fund through the church. "Consider it an investment in Harper's Creek's future," Henry explained, sliding the paperwork across the desk. As John reviewed the documents, his hands trembling slightly, Mary's voice came through on the bank's intercom. "Mr. Aldridge, I have an urgent call from the medical center regarding the new treatment program." Henry excused himself to take the call, leaving John alone with his thoughts. Through the office window, he could see the church spire rising above the town's other buildings, a beacon of hope that had guided the community through countless challenges. Now, it seemed, that same church would help save his daughter's life. But as John read through the loan terms more carefully, he discovered an unexpected clause that made his heart skip a beat. The document revealed a connection between Henry's banking empire and a controversial medical research program, the same program that Mary had been investigating the night before. The implications of this discovery would force John to make a decision that would test not only his faith but also his understanding of right and wrong. Before he could fully process this information, he heard footsteps approaching the office. Henry was returning, and John had mere seconds to decide how to handle what he'd just learned. The weight of Emily's future pressed against his conscience, while questions about the true nature of Henry's generosity swirled in his mind. As Henry returned to the office, John quickly composed himself, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd discovered. The connection between Henry's bank and the experimental medical program seemed too coincidental to ignore. Mary's research had revealed concerning details about similar programs that prioritized data collection over patient care. "Everything in order with the paperwork?" Henry asked, settling back into his chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. John managed a neutral expression, years of pastoral counseling helping him maintain his composure. "Actually, I have a few questions about the medical program mentioned in Section 7. A flicker of surprise crossed Henry's face before his practiced smile returned. "Ah, you have a keen eye, John." "Yes, our medical research division has been developing innovative treatments. In fact, they're particularly interested in cases like Emily's." He leaned forward, his voice taking on an almost conspiratorial tone. "We could fast-track her into the program. The treatment would be entirely covered." Back home that evening, John found Mary in Emily's room, watching their daughter sleep. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated Emily's pale face, making her appear even more fragile than usual. Mary turned to him, her nurse's training evident in the way she monitored Emily's breathing. "How did it go at the bank?" she whispered. In the kitchen, over cups of cooling tea, John shared everything he'd learned. Mary's expression grew increasingly troubled as he described the connection between the bank and the experimental program. "John, I've been doing more research," she said, pulling out a folder filled with printouts. "Remember Sarah Collins from the next town over? Her daughter participated in a similar program last year. The results were concerning." The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the church. A group of medical researchers, led by Dr. Patricia Chen, arrived unannounced during John's morning prayers. They carried sleek laptops and spoke in carefully measured terms about groundbreaking treatments and unprecedented success rates. Dr. Chen's presentation was polished, but John noticed how she skillfully deflected questions about long-term follow-up studies. Emily, who had been coloring in the church office, wandered into the sanctuary during the meeting. Dr. Chen's entire demeanor changed upon seeing her, and she immediately began taking notes while asking Emily questions about her symptoms. The interaction made John increasingly uneasy, especially when he noticed how the other researchers were documenting Emily's every movement. After the researchers left, John retreated to his study, overwhelmed by the weight of the decisions before him. The bank's offer represented their best chance at helping Emily, but at what cost? Through his window, he could see Mary in the garden, gathering herbs she used to help ease Emily's symptoms. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, they both knew they needed to dig deeper into the truth behind Henry's generous offer. The following Sunday, John stood at his pulpit, looking out over his congregation with new eyes. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows illuminated familiar faces, faces that had shared countless celebrations and hardships within these walls. As he delivered his sermon about faith and community, an idea began to take shape in his mind. After the service, Mary noticed a change in her husband's demeanor. "You're planning something," she said as they walked home, Emily skipping ahead despite her fatigue. John nodded, watching their daughter's determined spirit shine through her weakness. "I think we've been so focused on finding help from outside that we've forgotten our greatest strength." That evening, they hosted an emergency meeting in a living room with a small group of trusted community members. Sister Margaret, who had taught Sunday school for 30 years, Tom Wilson, the local pharmacist, and Rebecca Martinez, a retired legal secretary, listened intently as John and Mary shared their story, including their concerns about the experimental program. "So that's why those fancy cars were at the bank," Tom mused, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know, I've been hearing things about these research programs. They've been targeting small towns, offering miracle cures, but requiring complete control over the treatment process." Rebecca sat up straighter, her legal training evident in her precise questions about the bank's documentation. "This clause here," she pointed, "it essentially signs away your right to seek alternative treatments. And these liability waivers are far more extensive than standard medical procedures would require." Sister Margaret, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Before we built this church, we used to meet in my barn. Every family brought what they could, lumber, nails, their own 2 hands. We built this community together, and we'll face this challenge the same way." The next few days saw an extraordinary mobilization of Harper's Creek's residents. Tom reached out to his medical supply contacts, discovering a legitimate treatment option at a teaching hospital in the next state. Rebecca began organizing fundraising events, while Sister Margaret activated her vast network of former students, many of whom had gone on to successful careers in various fields. Word spread beyond Harper's Creek, reaching neighboring communities that had their own stories about Henry's medical research program. Local newspapers began asking questions, and families who had participated in similar programs started coming forward with their experiences. Emily, meanwhile, continued to touch hearts with her unwavering spirit. Despite her condition, she insisted on helping with the fundraising efforts, making colorful friendship bracelets to sell at the church bazaar. Her craftwork table became a gathering point for the community, where people shared stories, offered support, and strengthened their bonds. Mary's medical knowledge proved invaluable as she worked with Tom to research alternative treatments. Together, they discovered that Emily's condition, while serious, had documented success rates with conventional treatments that were actually higher than the experimental program's claimed results. Henry Aldridge arrived at the church unannounced one rainy morning, his expensive shoes muddy from the unpaved path. He found John not in his office, but among a group of volunteers who were organizing a community health fair in the church hall. The sight of the bustling activity, children making posters, elderly women preparing food, and local healthcare workers setting up information booths, seemed to give him pause. "I heard you declined our program's offer," Henry said, after John invited him to sit in a quiet corner of the sanctuary. His tone was curious rather than angry. "I thought we had an understanding, John. This could have been so simple." John smiled gently, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced since Emily's diagnosis. "The simplest path isn't always the right one, Mr. Aldridge. Our community has taught me that." He gestured to the activity visible through the church's doors. "What you see out there, that's the real miracle. Not a breakthrough drug or an experimental treatment, but people coming together to help one of their own." Henry's expression changed as he watched Emily move through the crowd, collecting donations in a decorated jar, her energy clearly stronger than it had been weeks before. "The traditional treatment is working?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "It is," John confirmed. "And more importantly, Emily knows she has an entire community supporting her recovery. Every child here knows that if they ever face a crisis, they won't face it alone." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Your program might help some people, Mr. Aldridge, but it shouldn't come at the cost of their autonomy or their community bonds." The health fair proved to be a turning point for Harper's Creek. Not only did it raise enough funds for Emily's treatment, but it also established a community health support network that would help other families facing medical challenges. The event attracted attention from neighboring towns, leading to discussions about expanding the program regionally. Months later, Emily stood before the congregation, her color restored and her strength growing daily. She shared her story, not just of her illness, but of the love and support that had surrounded her family during their darkest hours. Her words touched hearts and inspired action, leading to the establishment of a permanent community health fund. John watched his daughter speak, his heart full of gratitude. The church remained unchanged physically, the same wooden walls, the same modest steeple reaching toward the sky. But within its embrace, something profound had transformed. The community had discovered its own power to heal, to support, and to overcome challenges together. As Emily finished her speech, the congregation rose in a standing ovation, their applause echoing through the sanctuary. Mary squeezed John's hand, tears of joy in her eyes. They had faced their trial not by compromising their values, but by embracing the very principles that had always guided them: faith, community, and love. Dear viewers, we hope the story of Father John, Mary, and Emily has touched your hearts and reminded you of the power of community and faith. To continue this journey of inspiring narratives, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit. Don't miss our upcoming content, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful messages of hope and unity with the world.